All right, cool. Hey, what's up, guys? This is Alex from Mindful Attraction. And today we're going to be having Brianna, right?
Yes.
Brianna, okay, good. And I first heard about you because I saw an ad on Instagram about attachment styles. It was a pretty cool ad where it just came up like that on the side, stuff like that. I was like, that's so creative. And I saw some of your content and I went into your website and I was really fascinated because not only because of the subject, but because of how in depth you know your subject. You see what I'm saying? A lot of people know it, but on the surface, like me, only know the surface level of this, right? And I found it very fascinating because it's something that I've been trying to work on myself, right? But as a result, I wanted you to be on my channel and stuff like that, right? So let me ask you this, what got you, tell me about yourself. What got you into this field? What do you do? How long you been doing it? Yeah.
Well, probably like everybody else who gets into this line of work, I do it because I had rocky romantic relationships, right? And so attachment itself is originally starts as the study of how we connect to loving, caretakers in childhood, and then we look at that as being kind of like a blueprint for how then we connect to loving figures in adulthood. So that's sort of like attachment in its most basic form. So I had a lot of disrupted attachments in my childhood. My parents divorced when I was really young, lots of bouncing around between homes, state to state. Parents got remarried and divorced, step siblings, blended family, lots of financial disruption, living on welfare, then being fine, then losing all of it. And then, so it kind of turned me into a bit of an overachiever because I thought, well, overachieving is my way out of this, right?
Mm.
So I always did really well in school and ate that stuff up and got really into psychology and art. And so when I went to college, I found creative arts therapy, which is basically you're trained like a psychotherapist, but you learn how to use creative modalities as a way to explore your unconscious impulses, basically.
Hmm.
So I'm a licensed and board certified creative arts therapist, and that's what I've been doing for about 14 years now. And attachment was a part of it's just part of the curriculum. You have to learn about it. But the older I got, like even after I left grad school, and it wasn't until like a decade later, after going through all my own personal ups and downs with relationships, that did it finally, click. And then I thought, this needs to be an extension of what I do because I think that we experience things because on some level it is an aspect of our reason for being here. And if I
Yeah,
can.
was it shocking when you realized all the connections your childhood had with your relationships?
Well, it's funny. I was digging through some old papers and I realized I wrote this whole like thesis in graduate school like almost more than 14 years ago. And I read it again recently. I was like, "Oh my God, like I understood it then and never applied it until like a decade later."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, that was kind of like, "Oh." But it just I think it just I had a catalytic breakup like 4 years ago, and
What's that
and
catalytic?
meaning like bad,
Oh, okay,
like
okay.
really bad messy breakup. And just it's one of those things where it hurts so much that you sort of reach that point in your life where you're like, whatever, I am the common denominator here, and so whatever I keep encountering, that I must have something to do with it. And so it's sort of like I had to just reconfigure the way I even thought about how I was showing up in relationships. And so that's sort of like, you kind of hit a point where it's like, okay, I'm willing to surrender that I don't know everything, that maybe things aren't the way I think they are, and just kind of like finally being willing to open up to looking at things in a different way. And that was when I started, watching YouTube videos and reading a lot of self-help books, and what I did know of attachment started to click with things. And I ended up actually writing a book about grief. And
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know too much about that. That's like one of those subjects I know nothing about.
well, if you know about attachment, you know about grief.
Do you? Okay, okay. I don't like to assume, you know? I like to
Yeah.
look
Well,
at the
I've
stuff.
seen some of your videos and what you were talking about, and some of the things that you're talking about, the way people are relating to each other. The way I would define that is they're struggling with grief. And like layers of grief over their lifetime, like little developmental experiences of loss. It's sort of like they have a term, it's called complicated grief. And so they say, if grief is like mourning the loss of someone who says died, or you got a divorce and they moved away or something, if it's just mourning the loss of someone, then complicated grief is mourning the loss of wanting and mourning the loss of something that you never had and never will.
Complicated grief, could you define that?
So it's kind of like, so like if we have these push-pull relationships, which I know you've been talking about on your channel, right?
It's not the nicest.
But we have these push-pull relationships, and like you have these women, the way that I've heard you just, who just keep going back for more. It's like they're almost like a glutton for punishment, right? And there's something about the punishing quality of the partner that keeps them coming back, like almost like masochistic, right? Like they're, right. And it's, the idea is that they're hoping to relive in order to revise some old wound from childhood. So they had a parent that they were never good enough for, or they had a parent who didn't acknowledge them or didn't love them in the ways that they needed to be loved. And so they understand love in that way. And if I can just get my partner to give me what my parent never gave me, then I can heal this wound, and then I will be okay. Then I'll be happy, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like literally hardwired into our pathways in our limbic brain and the synaptic part of our brain. And it actually lights up in the same parts of the brain as when a mother looks at pictures of her newborn infant, and when a drug addict looks at pictures of drug paraphernalia.
Wow.
So
why is it so hard to notice the link? Because it feels like it has nothing to do with the past. You know what I'm saying? Like in the moment, you just see it from the present moment. You don't, like unless you do some introspection, what do you think is so hard to notice the origin of those things?
Well, I think we're not really trained to do a lot of introspection, right? We're kind of trained from birth to give authority to the people around us. And, for example, you're a kid and you're jumping around from the couch to the floor, from the coffee table to the chair, and you're tying a cape around your neck and you're like, look, I'm Superman, look at me go. And so in that moment, as a child, you are experimenting with, what are my capacities? What you're allowing your imagination to create narratives for yourself. Like you're testing reality, right? How true is this? And you can have a parent who says, oh, look at you, Superman, look at you go, you're so big and strong, right? Or you have someone who says, I just cleaned that rug, shut up, sit down, you are ruining my furniture, can't you see that I'm having a hard time here? Oh, everything I do for you and you pay no attention, and blah, 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 right? So ungrateful. So this is obviously an exaggerated spectrum that we're talking about here, and you're not going to ruin your kid if you just clean the living room and you're upset that they're dragging mud across it. But if that's your response every single time that child is trying to be playful, or every single time that child is trying to express themselves creatively, or every single time that child is trying to test their own agency in the world, then they are going to think from this high authority figure that is telling them what they are worth and what they are valued, they are going to think the furniture is more important than me. The whatever is going on out there is more important than whatever's going on in here. So I'm going to completely ignore, suppress, deny, not pay attention to whatever's going on in here, and I'm going to trust everything else and everyone else outside of me to tell me who and what I am and what it is that I need to value in this world, right? And so over time, so we end up engaging with our external environments, the partners that we attract, without having any kind of like rituals or practices for having that internal state of reflection. Like, why did I just do that? Why did I say that? Oh, I'm feeling upset today. I wonder what that's about. Like, we don't just breathe, like we just don't do that.
Yeah. It's almost like our thinking mind doesn't really let us give us access to our emotional mind per se. I was thinking about that, and one of the reasons why I think it is, I don't know, is because when we're experiencing those emotions, we really haven't developed our cognitively, our ability to self-reflect. Sometimes we don't even have that ability to self-reflect when we go through those experiences. So it's almost like a ringing in our ears that we had our whole lives. We think that those emotions are just prefixed in there. We don't think that's something wrong with that, and that's something you could fix. It's kind of like,
I love that metaphor you just used, the ringing in your ears.
I just had it today. I just went to the eye doctor.
So good. So good.
Oh,
Because
word? Okay.
yeah, because it's like it's a trauma response. So like what I was just describing, you know, the harsh reaction to something like which we might consider a normal childhood experience, we would call like a developmental trauma. And if you have, you can imagine a situation like that at school, teacher, shut up, sit down, sit in these uncomfortable chairs, don't talk, you know, learn in exactly this way, but maybe not in the way that you learn best, you know. And so we encounter that in every single facet of our lives. It's like an assault on the body, because the body is the first organizer of experience. If you can imagine your body, you know, taste, sound, touch, like your body when you are young is how you take in all the information around you, right? And if you can imagine, and then we have an emotional response to that information, and then that gets travels to the brain, and then the brain decides what kind of information it is, and then it sends it to your neocortex, which is your cognitive, like you said, like where we start to have higher thinking processes about things, or it gets stuck in the limbic part, which is the primal part, which is mood, food, sleep, also the part that's connected with attachment and with addiction and grief. And it gets stuck there. And if it's strong enough, because the body floods with something like cortisol, and all of that impacts the ability for that information to be integrated into like your higher cognition, which we might think of as also a way that we start to have consciousness around things, right? So it's like you just got assaulted by something and there's a ringing in your ears. And if you're always hearing that ringing in your ears, meaning like every stage of your development was met with these little kind of dismissive traumas from people you were encountering, that's what you believe your reality is. That's just the way it is. So it's like it now becomes a fan whirring in the background. It's just always there. You just assume that's how it is. And then one day someone turns the fan off and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it
Yeah, or
could be like this.
something bad, or someone triggers the emotions you were trying to suppress all those years.
Yeah.
You realize you have no choice to either face it or go deeper into that abyss.
Yeah.
You know, and let me ask you this. So I have some questions that people ask me, and I want you to answer them too, if you could for me, please.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's because, like, how can I say it? Me, I'm the type of person, I know the things that I don't know. All right. And to me
That's a wise man.
yeah, I guess.
A wise man knows that he knows nothing.
Yeah, I suppose, right? But it's because, you know, nobody wants to be one of those know-it-all people, right? I have my own limitations, right? So and also because me, I just realized I'm more of like I'm an avoiding, anxious type of attachment kind of person, right? Like if I want to be close to you, but if you get too close, I need some distance. And I used to think that there was something wrong with me. But then after like studying this for my own self, I was reading this book, The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. I don't know if you heard of it.
I haven't. I'll check it out.
Oh, oh, he's amazing. He if you love human nature, he talks about that, right? And anyway, so let me just read these things, right? Because it's fine, it's very interesting. So can you explain the different types of attachment styles?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's lots of research and there's lots of different like names in the literature for these different things, but I tend to follow Mary Main's research, which I think is a little clearer. But basically there's 4 attachment styles. So the first one is called anxious attachment. Sometimes it's called anxious ambivalent. Sometimes it's called anxious preoccupied. But overall, we're describing people who tend to be more anxious. They tend to be more clingy. They tend to be very preoccupied with what their partner's doing all the time. It's sort of like their every waking thought. You know, if they're in a relationship, their every waking thought is about what their partner needs doing, is how they are responding to them. Or if they're not in a relationship, thinking about how can I get into a relationship. So there's a lot of sense of personal value tied up in being in partnership. They're also really giving. They're really generous. They can be very creative. They're also very forgiving, you know, and they have a lot of motivation and compassion for their partners and a willingness to make things work. And they're also very good at picking up on emotional cues. Sometimes that can also be their downfall, though, because they can become hypervigilant about it, and then they may jump to a negative assumption about something, thinking they accurately pick up that someone's having a bad day or that someone's upset, but then they inaccurately assume it's their fault. And so then they may try to be over helpful in order to compensate, and it only ends up annoying their partner because their partner's like, why are you trying to make everything about you, right? So that's kind of someone who's more anxious. I refer to them as open hearts, though, because I think language constructs our realities in a big way. And if we are referring to ourselves with these very sterile, sort of negative words, I have this. Okay, I'll finish
I
my
can see it
thought.
much clearly once you said that. Like it makes so much more sense because that
Yeah.
means your heart is open to receive and also to get hurt.
Yeah. And then boundaries is really what you have to learn, right? For everyone. But so then the other end of that spectrum, we have avoidant partners, and avoidant partners are people who typically need a lot of space and independence in a partnership. So you might say anxious open hearts prioritize more feeling understood and supported, whereas avoidant individuals prefer feeling respected, and they like feeling as though they are given enough space to pursue their own passions. If they want to be supported, they want to be supported in what they are doing. They feel supported by being respected. And it's not always, they go together, but there's a subtle difference, because an open heart, oh, he just sees me, he gets me, he knows me, I love that, and that's like a big turn on for them. But the person who gets them and sees them but also treats them like shit isn't going to dissuade them, because they feel like, oh, I feel seen, because they don't ever feel seen. And then they think, and deep down they kind of think they're not worthy of love. So if someone is avoidant and presents a challenge
Which
to
one?
them,
Which one?
both of them actually.
Both of them.
But an anxious person approaches it differently than an avoidant person will.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And the thing that's kind of interesting is an avoidant person will be avoidant until they meet someone more avoidant than them, and then they become kind of anxious.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, right? I tell that to women that if you meet a guy that's really has a lot of options, the best way to stand out is to be more distant than he is, because that offends them. That offends their pride.
Yeah, well, it offends them, but it also presents the challenge that they've been lacking. And this is why I say these are actually more similar than they are different. We see it as opposites attract, but it's actually that they are both operating under the same paradigm. They just express it outwardly in what appear to be opposing ways.
Whoa.
So like the avoidant person, for example, they like a lot of space, they like independence in a relationship, but they also can feel smothered in relationship. They also can feel like they get irritated by their partner, and they usually attract anxious partners. They get irritated by them because as much as they feel attracted to the vitality of an open heart, as much as they feel attracted to the effusiveness and the, open hearts really do have kind of a pulse, like a finger on the pulse, like they're very vivacious. And so I think avoidant partners tend to be attracted to someone like that. But at the same time, they're attracted to it because within themselves, they have suppressed and or cut off some of their own vivaciousness, because
Oh yeah, you think?
it makes them vulnerable. They think it makes them weak. They think it makes them susceptible to emotional manipulation. So
Mhm.
then when that vivaciousness turns into, you wouldn't do that if you really loved me. Now the avoidant partner feels, you're not going to emotionally manipulate me. I am not going to be controlled by that. Peace. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
But what the irony is that if an anxious person is chasing an avoidant person, then there's something they're avoiding within themselves. There's something that they're actually afraid to receive. You wouldn't keep chasing someone who doesn't give you what you want if that's what you really wanted.
Yeah, yeah.
So avoidant partners know the feeling of anxiety. They wouldn't be avoidant if they didn't. You're avoidant because you're avoiding the fear of feeling anxious, because you hate that feeling. So you learn to cut it off, and you learn not to identify with it. So then the anxious person also hates feeling anxious, but instead of cutting it off and trying to do turning in on the self, instead they reach for an external thing to alleviate the feeling for as long as they can. So it's both actually degrees of avoidance, but it's just turned outward or turned inward.
Yeah, I'm that way wherein like I deal with my anxiety with smoking weed and like, but at the same time it makes me sometimes more isolated, which deals with my desire for distance. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like I've always wondered like which one is easier to change. I think it's harder to change if you're an avoidant. I'm like
Well,
that.
the research would support your opinion. What research has been done says that anxious partners tend to be more open and willing to say because they are wanting to work on it, because they already, we can talk about values, they're already valuing the idea of a relationship, right? They already value it and think of it as a positive experience, even if they've been somewhat tumultuous, right? Now, avoidant partners, they're kind of like, what the fuck do I need a relationship for? Sex and maybe sharing resources, right? So and it's likely, and of course these are the reasons for these things, is because that has been their experience. It doesn't come out of nowhere.
Why are they so obsessed with sex? Why is it so dry and simplistic that what they see? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm like that, you know?
Well, avoidance, I think that because it's actually the same thing with anxious partners too, is that when you experience relationships as a power dynamic, and both do, actually, both ends of the spectrum do, and incidentally, disorganized attachment, which is someone who experiences these two ends of the stick at like a high volume, so someone who's more avoidant tends to act and think and behave this way more often than not, right? There'll be a little bit of anxiety in there, but they're more often want distance, don't jump in too quickly, blah, blah, blah. An anxious partner, more often than not, tends to be clingy, tends to want to have a lot of emotional contact, tends to want to spend a lot of time with you, but there's a level of avoidance within them as well, right? But it's about a frequency. So more often than not, they might hang out on this end of the stick, right? If you've got someone who's what is sometimes called disorganized or fearful avoidant or anxious avoidant, it means that they have both ends of that spectrum. They're a little bit more towards the middle, where it's almost like you've got two radios blaring two completely different genres of music, and it's like at a high volume. And so that creates a tremendous amount of anxiety, because you have a lot of ambivalence. Like there's a lot of friction going on inside you. Like you want closeness, but you don't want it. You feel very infatuated and really into someone, and then it's like 3 months go by, and all of a sudden they're gone. Feeling's gone.
It's like when you're lonely, but you don't want to socialize.
Right. Which right now is a great time for folks like that.
Right. So it's the best time for the introverts. Yeah, it's because I'm that way. Where in like sometimes I do want to make more friends, but at the same time, it's kind of like I'm too comfortable with my habits. If I look at people with friends with a lot, it's not that I don't have friends, but I have a few friends. When I look at people with a lot of friends, I feel envy. But then it's kind of like once I'm in that situation, once I'm with my friends, I need some distance.
You're exhausted.
Yeah, what the fuck? So it's kind of like, how do they change? How could they change? Like, is it possible? You know what I'm saying? How do you, because what I began to do, trying to do, this is what I noticed. When I travel and I'm in the place that I don't know anybody, I'm more open to make friends. When I'm here in my comfort zone, I'm like, I don't need that many friends. I'm good, you know? So I don't know. But what are the strategies for those people to change for the positive, not for the negative?
Well, so that's an ongoing question and debate in the realms of attachment research. But what they've found is that, like if you're in therapy, you need to be doing some kind of work, like some kind of therapy, self-reflective. It can't be done alone in isolation. It's just going to reinforce the same old constructs that you have around relatedness, right? It's your ideas about what serves you and what doesn't serve you. They have to be challenged a little bit. And you have to establish enough of a trusting rapport with someone that you value them enough that when they challenge you, you're willing to accept that challenge, basically, which is why partners who really do have what's called dismissive avoidance only typically make it into therapy when they've had a major attachment issue. So, for example, they do love a partner, but they haven't been connecting on, a deep emotional level. And that partner's like, that's it, I'm getting a divorce unless we do this, right? Or partner, because avoidant partners do get married, can have long-term relationships, can commit to those things, but their partners will experience them as emotionally unavailable, or they experience them as almost as if there's like a veil between them, like in the relationship, and they just feel like they want the connection to deepen, but it's almost like the more they're committed, the less deep the partner becomes. And then they start having, what's that, FOMO, fear of missing out, right? And so then they start romanticizing, whatever their life would have been if I hadn't have made this decision, right? And so they sort of use
the avoidance.
Yeah.
Wow.
So so what brings them into therapy is or other research has also shown things like warfare. If they're a soldier and they end up experiencing some kind of PTSD, that's going to crack them open like a nut. Or having a child that has a major disability or chronic illness.
Why?
Because it's going to rattle their most essential attachment wounds themselves. Because a child is an extension of you, and the child is going to be very helpless and needy. And this is an obligation. And this is the other thing too, I will say, for clients that I have met that are more avoidant, they're often assumed to be, commitment phobes or, whatever. But I actually find that most avoidant partners actually take commitment tremendously seriously, which is why they are so averse to it. Because if and when they do commit themselves to something, it's like they're integrating it into one of those routines that you described that's really hard to break, and they know that that's what they're going to do, so they will stave it off for as long as humanly possible, because they actually feel a very deep sense of obligation to what commitments they will make. And so, if you have someone who has a more avoidant attachment style who then has a child, if they make that decision, it was probably a very big one for them, and then that child has some kind of disability or chronic illness, then it is going to constantly be pulling at what their original attachment wounds are themselves, because you can't be absent in a relationship like that.
So what is going to make them more open emotionally?
Yeah, like it kind of cracks them open on an emotional level.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember one time last year I'm the same way with my parents. I tend to be very cold with them, and then not because I don't like them, but because I need some distance. My mom is more of like an anxious type. So she pushes me away with the amount of attention. I'm like, yo, I need some distance, mom. You know what I'm saying? And that offends her. It's like she doesn't get it. You know what I'm saying? But I noticed what cracked it was one time I was I smoke a lot of weed. Okay, not for this. I don't smoke. Okay, but I definitely use it to self-soothe. And one time I smoked a little bit too much, right? And then one day I was reading this book called, again, The Laws of Human Nature. There's a chapter on it that's called Death Denial, Contemplating on Your Own Mortality. And when I listened to it while I was pretty high, the thought of death and the death of my family just brought me more closer. And I was like feeling anxious. I was like, I need to see them. Something could happen. And when I went there, it was different because I thought the thought of them dying one day made me miss them a lot more. You know what I'm saying? And so it's kind of like it's like maybe something that wounds you, or maybe something that, I don't know. It's like death definitely opens up the heart of people who are closed. As you see, when there's a tragedy, people who are closed come out and become more social.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like a part of their ego makes it okay to do so, right? Wow. That, like, there's something in the environment or in the circumstance that they can tell themselves, okay, it's appropriate to show up in this way now, right? Because the context, it calls for it.
Yeah. So how could they change though? What are some of the things that you recommend for people who are avoidant and anxious to go towards more of a secure attachment?
Well, it's interesting because the context changes depending on, like, if you were a therapist and I was telling you as a therapist, like, here are the ways that you might approach it, right? But if you are just, you want to do your own self-work kind of thing, then I would say you want to establish connections with people that, actually, I recommend not trying to work on this in a romantic context at first, because you're just going to get triggered over and over and over and over again, and you're going to feel like, God, this is so not worth it, and it's only going to end up like reinforcing your coping skills, basically. But I actually, you were talking about, I see people who have a lot of friends and I envy that, but then I get myself in a similar situation. I feel exhausted. That actually sounds like a really wonderful place to start playing with your energetic boundaries around connection, right? Because it may be that you're it's like an expansion and a contraction, right? Like, I like hanging out with all these people. I get into new environments and it feels exciting and stimulating, but then I have to come back in and I have to isolate and I have to self-soothe because I feel energetically like depleted, right? So it's almost like you or anyone else who I'm sure connects with what you're saying has this experience of boundaries as being all in or all out, right? And so I think, in our platonic relationships, maybe exploring, okay, so when do I notice myself starting to feel depleted at an outing with friends, right? Or when do I notice texting and talking to this person throughout the week starts to feel like too much, right? And in those moments, can I work on like just explicitly stating, and I guess tactfully, hey, can I hit you up next week? This week I still, there's other things I got to attend to, right? Or something like that. And because that then becomes like a template for then moving that into the much more scary and stimulating realm of romantic partnership, right? The other thing is working with metaphor. So usually if we are trying to hit something head on, we only add more momentum to the thing we're trying to change, right? So for example, it could be someone. I'll take an anxious example because I think it could also, I think the avoidant partner could have a similar inner monologue, which is, so I know I have these avoidant tendencies and I'm trying to change because my experience has taught me that I think and I believe, and a part of me knows that there must be something delicious and exciting and reciprocal about a loving relationship. Like there must be some depth of meaning and purpose that exists in that context. And it's something that I haven't really experienced to the fullness of what I believe is possible. And so there's a part of you that is willing, that does believe, even if you're asking the question, right? So in asking the question, you must also have a concept that it exists. And so then you're like, but I have these tendencies, right? And so then begins this downward spiral of, but since I have these tendencies, even if I got a healthy, secure partner, I'd probably fuck it up anyway. And then they'd be hurt. And then I'd feel even worse about myself and right? So now we have a double trouble. So now not only are you aware of you're aware of your avoidant tendencies, which is kind of like step one, yay, like bird's eye view, great. Now I can make choices about this thing I see and witness within myself. And then the second, but now, then you're like, oh, now I have these tendencies. What am I going to do about it? So now you have like a double trouble, right? And so I think that's more where we step into like compassion, like self-compassion. Like, so security is not that you need to eliminate your avoidant tendencies. Security is being aware of them and being allowing of them, and then being okay with like wherever you are in the moment. And the more you can allow yourself to just be who and what you are and be okay in the moment with that, then the more you start to allow other people to be okay with who and what they are and where they are in their process. And then you meet someone and you're like, oh, we're both kind of messed up, but we're like kind of messed up together and we're willing to be honest about our messed upness. And in some ways that actually kind of makes, our messed upness actually makes us kind of perfect for each other. And like, look at all these co-creative, amazing things that we can, explore through these dialogues that we can have, right?
It's almost like you're giving yourself the love that you really want. It's almost like, how can I say, it's kind of like, I know what you mean. It's kind of like, I do this with myself. Like whenever I don't believe in something, like let's say I have a goal in my head, right? And I don't believe I could do it. A part of me does believe because I'm trying to believe.
Yeah.
So what I tell myself is, hey, the part that doesn't believe, it's okay. I understand why you don't believe it. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to change you. And it's almost like you're giving it. It's almost like that part is barren. It doesn't have any water. The ground is dry. And when you say it's okay, you're giving it water and you're allowed to grow. And it's not instantaneous, but that you feel good. You feel more open. And so if it's there, that means you're gonna give it out. You're gonna feel more warmer towards people.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Are you a painter?
Oh yeah, but that's my roommates. I draw these. Yeah, I paint these.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Getting in touch with my emotional side. That's
Well,
important.
I was going to say, I asked, that's amazing. I asked because your language, you're very visual in your language. You talk kind of like an art therapist, actually.
Oh, in what way?
Well, the last few things you've described have been very metaphorical, right? Like you're able to use the metaphor to communicate ideas. And that's kind of like that's actually what I would how I recommend actually anyone with insecure attachment really work with these things, but work with the metaphor. Because when we think about higher cognition or higher consciousness or whatever, our ability to do that, according to theories of cognitive development, is that we use the body and the body's experiences to create symbols. And then symbols eventually become layered on top of one another, and then we start using words to kind of break apart what the symbols mean to us, right? But like that term, a picture's worth 1,000 words, is true, you know, and so you like and archetypes play a role in this too. So like, for example, like an archetype is like, you see a picture of a mother holding a baby, and almost all human beings across the planet will say mother and child, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that could just be like, you know, the librarian just holding some woman's kid while the mother, you know, unpacks the stroller, right? Like, but we immediately assume it's like an instinctual human thing. We assume mother, child. So that's a symbol that we all have like a collective assumption about, right? But your experience of mother may be very different than my experience of mother, may be very different than so-and-so's experience of mother, right? So we all have this collective instinctual response to symbols, right? There's the instinctual response, and then we'll have all our own personal, let's say, content or material that gets added to that over the course of our lives. And it, you know, kind of snowballs, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it starts to color our own perceptions of the world and possibilities for love, like wearing, you know, sunglasses. So when we are able to, this is why I say I think we can really tap into the attachment stuff when we use symbols, because there's actually layers and layers and layers of information that we are working with in a nonverbal, unconscious way. And like what we're able to articulate is like this big compared to how much we actually experience the world, you know, and compared to our feeling responses to the world and to our lovers and, you know, into our attachment relationships.
Yeah, it's because like symbols, before we created language, we spoke in symbols. It's the most primitive way of processing things is through images.
Or the most sophisticated.
The most sophisticated too, right? Sometimes primitive it does not mean.
And that's a paradox.
Yeah, because like when you try to understand yourself through consciously, you're only gonna go so far. You know, the real shovel is in images, is in trying to, like, for example, I remember one time I was trying to understand it, and so I found out like a meditation on how to heal like pain that you have with your parents. And one of the meditations was, imagine all the shit that your parents went through to become who they are. See them cry, imagine what would they have to go through to become who they are and to treat you in such a way. Right. So I imagine it with my mom. I imagine the kind of parents she had, because my grandma's evil. I call her my evil grandma. She's cute though, but she's evil, you know. Right. So I imagine all the stuff that she went through and all the pain and why she did what she did through her own pain's perspective. And then when it came down to it, forgiving her or not, I was like, wait a minute, like, she's not her fault. It was only not, it's one thing to think about, it's another thing to see it in a very vivid image in your head that just, it taps into your emotions a lot more than just thinking about it. You know, it's like your body reacts to images a lot more than your words.
Well, you know, I also have a very reactive mother. And I think that one of the things that helped me come to terms with it, because I had the piece where I did have empathy, and then I was like, yeah, but you still have to take responsibility for yourself, you know, the older you get. And so I kind of like went back and forth on this sort of seesaw, and it was judgment, you know, it was judgment that I had, and it was judgment that stemmed from me wanting to have gotten something I never felt like I got, you know, and which is what I earlier defined as a form of grief, right? Then I kind of arrived on this idea, and I will share it in a metaphor too. And it is that if you can imagine the idea that potential, like a person's potential, is not necessarily the same thing as their purpose. So if you can imagine, we've got like two seeds, right? And the seeds are in the earth, and one seed gets the water, gets the nutrients, gets the sunlight, and it grows up and it blooms and it becomes this flower, and the bees come along and it pollinates and yada yada, it fulfilled its potential, right? But the other seed, let's say like a squirrel came along and dug it up and exposed it to the world. And so then a bird came by and swooped it up and like fed it to its baby chicks, right? So we might say that the flower fulfilled its potential, but the seed still served a very essential purpose, right? Like maybe it didn't meet its potential as a seed, but it still served a really important function to the ecosystem as a whole, right? and they both served the ecosystem, but in different ways. So I now, whenever I encounter a person who's very crotchety or crabby or judgmental or critical, I look at them and I think to myself, thank you. Like, I am so full of gratitude that you are here fulfilling a purpose and willing to suffer the experience that you must be having to hold that kind of energy or vibration in your being, so that I can have a response to you that allows me to step into what I feel is my fullest potential. Right. So thank you for serving that purpose. And so anytime I find myself feeling irritated or whatever, I immediately try to switch into gratitude, because I start understanding them in the context of a much larger whole.
Yeah, gratitude is truly one of the most healing things that people could do. And it's very underrated because we don't do it with as much intensity as we should, you know? Like,
Well, it's
gratitude
hard to get there. I don't think you can force gratitude before someone's ready. You know, you got to be mad first, because that allows you, that the anger lets you set a boundary you probably didn't have before.
Yeah, and those are used for emotions. It's kind of like when people think they're super nice, so they don't let angry emotions in consciously.
Meanwhile, those are the people you got to watch out for.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah, hell yeah.
Those are the people who will like slash your tires one day.
Yeah. I watch out for people who look too perfect on the outside. I'm like, I don't know you yet. You're too perfect. You know, like, this is just a gift wrap. What's underneath that? You know, oh, another visual image, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, it's fascinating. You know, something about studying this that made me realize is that we're very, almost in a way, predictable. We're in a way, we're very, because the reason why I felt like I never had, the reason why, 'cause for example, like when I was a little kid, I thought I knew myself. So I was like, there's no way that my childhood could affect me. You know, it's like you're not aware of the effects. So you just keep living on having these patterns and not knowing the sources of it. Right. So what I learned when I started studying this, it's kind of like when, for example, like little girls who get inappropriate attention from their fathers become like, learn to associate love with getting the attention of men. So they become very flirty. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, what I noticed is that by simply knowing or observing the origins of your emotions, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes, not all the time. Like, for example, when I did that meditation of just forgiving my mom and all that sort of stuff, I did notice I was a little warmer to women. like it's almost like when I see a woman, it's like, you know, when somebody reminds you of somebody,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, fuck, I hate that person. Just because you remind me of somebody.
That's called transference. Yeah.
Transference, right? Or I think it's very similar to the archetypes, wherein women remind you of your mother a lot.
Yeah.
Unconsciously.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I was with this girl who didn't like me that much, but I did notice that the relationship was very similar to my mom. It's like we would lay in bed together, and I would literally lay in with her almost as I was laying with my mom. And it got her, it pushed her away eventually, right? But I couldn't help but notice the similarities looking back at it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, the reason was because I just didn't see how predictable and autonomous, not autonomous, what's the opposite of autonomous? I don't know.
Dependency?
Robotic I was.
Automatic?
Yeah, automatic. Yeah. You know, so it's something that, I don't know. It's just, people think they're too independent, so they don't really look back that much because they think they know it all about themselves.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Looking back, I think, is a useful phase of it, because you start to understand your context, right? And then we also start to understand how contexts start to kind of dictate our worldview, right? And then if we can become more discerning about the frame through which we're understanding something, then actually you gain more personal freedom, right? Because that actually gives you more choices about what you will and won't accept about your own reality. But you know, it's interesting because someone asked me recently, they were saying, you know, I keep getting into fights with my girlfriend, but it's always when I'm trying to tell her about my past so that she understands that I know what my issues are and I'm working through them. But anytime I try and tell her about my past, she picks a fight, or she this, she that. And I think what's interesting is that there's also a point at which like the retelling of old stories actually keeps them alive. So we can actually work with these things like in the present moment, because as much as you can have an awareness about where they come from, they're still active now, right? So sometimes it's a little bit of like explaining the context first. Like, I want to tell you this because, but it's almost always about connection. Like if you're meeting someone who's trying to control you, it's because they want to connect with you. Issues of control are almost always because they think a connection is being threatened and they're trying to reestablish it. And actually, sometimes people who are avoidant because they're trying to sustain the connection. Look, if I sit here and I try and hash this out with you, I'm going to stop liking you. So I need to withdraw myself so that I can come back. Because if you don't let me go now, I'm not going to come back, right? So that also is actually a way of trying to preserve connection. But if your way of preserving his connection is doing this and your way of preserving connection is doing that, obviously we're going to have a lot of trouble, right?
Yeah.
So he was like, how do I connect with my partner? Every time I try and tell her something about myself, she disappears, or she thinks I'm trying to trying to make it like about something wrong she's doing, whatever. And I think it's that we have to realize that just like taking another layer off, peeling another layer off, like, look, the only way I know how to connect with you is to tell you how it's been for me in the past, but I'm willing and open to create a co-creative process with you here in the present moment. And so just being curious, like, I'm just wondering, how do you feel the most connected to me? When do you feel the most connected to me? Tell me what that looks like. And we can start doing more of that here now in the present moment, because I realize that maybe sometimes telling these old stories stimulates old feelings in a new situation. And I want this to be a new thing that is just ours. But I feel myself wanting to share this story with you because actually there's a piece of me that wants to connect with a piece of you. And if you can take the story in and know that it's just me trying to share myself with you, then I think that would help me feel more connected, right? And I'm open to knowing how you would feel more connected to me.
You think it's rare to find people who are willing to do all that work?
Has anyone ever said that to you?
I mean,
in not so many words?
No, not that much. You know, I've always been very independent, but that's what avoidants say. They value independence.
Sure.
You know, that's something the few things that I study that they say one of the things that they value is independence. They emphasize that. I love a woman who's independent, you know? So it's kind of like hinting to you that, hey man, you should be independent. But let me ask you this though. I don't know how long you have left. I mean, you have
we can go for a little while if you have more questions.
Okay. Yeah. How do you identify an avoidant partner, and what's the best way to deal with them if you're an anxious or vice versa?
Well, if you're an anxious partner, I wouldn't, and you haven't gotten involved with them yet, I wouldn't recommend it. Only because, and not because I actually consider myself to be more avoidant also, but only because you're going to be triggered. You're going to be triggered a lot. And if you can find a secure partner, which is the fourth style, I don't know that I outlined that one very well, but a secure partner is someone who, like the sentiment that I just vocalized, like someone who has a more secure attachment style is likely to say something like that. So someone who has, so for example, if someone's expressing a need in a relationship, and an avoidant partner might be like, your needs are not my problem. You need to figure that out so I'll leave and come back when you're more reasonable, right? Or like, that's your problem. Stop trying to make it my problem, right? Whereas a secure person might be like, oh, well, thank you for sharing that need with me. You know, let's talk about what some possible solutions might be. I'll tell you what I can do, and your feelings matter to me, so I'm going to do what I can. But they're not going to abandon themselves for it. Whereas someone who has a more avoidant attachment assumes that the anxious person is asking them to abandon themselves to help them. It's almost an immediate assumption, right? You're asking me to abandon myself so that you can be happy. It's a hypersensitive response to when someone else expresses their needs. Now, granted, the needs that an anxious person has tend to be experienced as insatiable sometimes. And so some of it is just so the avoidant partner has to be really good about their boundaries. And if they are really good about their boundaries, they're actually more flexible than they are rigid, right? And they just, kind of have to tolerate being willing to engage with the anxious person's anxiety until the anxious person sometimes when they get a bit of what they need, it starts to calm down. But then the avoidant person feels like they gave away too much. Now they also feel like I've lost control in this relationship, right? So both of them also have a lot of power dynamic stuff going on. They want to be in control of the relationship, because when you have an insecure attachment style, at the basis of it is a fear of survival, and you survive by being in control, right? So I think it can work because, as I said before, they're both expressing the same kind of fears. It's just equal and opposite sides of that same issue. And so there's actually very deep connection that can occur between them because they do see and understand each other so well. There are moments where they really get each other. It's like sometimes you meet someone who has this sort of opposing attachment style and you're like, oh, the heavens have opened up, you know, like lightning strikes, like, oh, he's the one, she's the one. Like it's just like, you just feel, it feels like kismet, like it was intended. And it is because they do have these intersections. But if you're, let's say, a more anxious person and you're trying to work with an avoidant partner, the best thing you can do is actually stop trying to pay so much attention to who they are and what they're doing, and preoccupying yourself with every little facet of the relationship and trying to strategize every little facet of the relationship. Instead, realize what you do and what you do well, and do that a lot more. Like, have your own passions, have your own pursuits, have a big group of friends, make friend dates, go out, date multiple people, like be someone who, if commitment is something you're really looking for, don't just go on a few dates with someone and be like, oh, I really like him and I think I'm just going to be with them. And no, like, unless you have had the talk and you're on the same page, you need to stop investing yourself so emotionally in one person and praying that they're going to be the one, because that's your attachment system inflamed. Right.
Wow.
So I think it's, if there is a strategy in trying to work with more avoidant partners, it is one that you need to turn on yourself so that you feel like you are filled up, so that when you come and engage with that person, you are actually coming at it from a place of generosity as opposed to a place of strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or as opposed to a place of manipulation, or as opposed to thirsting for something because you feel like you're starving, right? So to be filled up.
You know what's funny? What really helped with my anxious attachment is doing art, because I remember when I was like, again, this happened to me like I would it's crazy, I will like what got me to get, because I don't know if you know too much about me, I started learning I wasn't good with women when I was younger because I was Christian. I was a Bible teacher. So I wasn't really focused on talking to women.
Well, that's why you're so good on YouTube and articulating yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, when you read the Bible, you do a lot of metaphors. The Bible has a lot of metaphors. So when I was younger, I was taught to think that way. I am the light of the world. It's a lot of metaphor. You know what I'm saying? So you get trained in that. But what happens is that you tend to don't know how to talk to the opposite sex because you're taught to be distant. You cannot have sex when you're younger, right? So because of that, when I was younger, I felt like I was very behind. So I learned, I gravitated towards the first thing on Google, which was how to pick up women. And it got me to learning how to approach women in the clubs or bars, right? So my anxiety got me to approach women, right? But what tended to happen is that it brought it out. It brought out those anxieties that I wasn't feeling before. And if I wasn't on a date, I would feel anxious. I would feel depressed. So what I began doing, I started smoking, right? And then when I started doing art, I gravitated too much towards art that those emotions turned into passion to wanting to get good at art, right? And now I could just go a whole day and just not even mind because I have something to focus on, right? So it kind of fixed the anxious part, but not the avoiding part, because then art takes you to be more avoidant sometimes, you know. But it's yeah, that's how I learned to deal with it, and but I always tell my clients that if you're dating someone who's distant, always give them more space than necessary, because then you'll know when they want you to be closer, because they'll ask you. Am I right?
You can't know otherwise. And I think that's something else anxious open hearts have a tendency to do, is they want to fill the silence. They want to fill the space. And they want to make things easier for their partner, right? They're like, well, maybe then they start telling themselves, well, maybe he's nervous about texting me, or maybe he doesn't know what to say, or maybe he doesn't this, or maybe he doesn't that. I'll just text him and I'll just, I'll make it easier for him. I'll give him a topic to talk about. So they try to carry it. Like they try to carry the communication. They try to establish the connection because they, God love them, they underestimate the people that they want to date. There is a little bit of that, you know, and so for someone, so they, anxious open hearts also tend to view avoidant partners as emotionally weak, because they feel like I'm too intense for him. It's too much of a burden. Anytime I try to express a need, they disappear, they run away. And so then they'll start need suppression, and they'll start saying, I'm fine, I'm fine. But then the partner knows they're not fine, because you can read that energy like a Christmas tree, right? And so over time, their partner starts distrusting you because you invalidate what it's obvious that they are sensing around you. And you're invalidating it within yourself. And so then they start to be confused about the way they're reading you, and they start distrusting you, and they start not feeling safe with you. And then all of a sudden, you know, I don't know, the chemistry's just off. They're not going to articulate it in the way that I'm saying it, but.
Yeah, and once an avoidant doesn't trust you, I mean, like, I don't know, I'm like that. Once I don't trust you, I don't trust you at all, you know?
Well, and then they think, well, you're playing a game. Like, I can sense there's something going on with you, but you're saying, oh, no, I'm fine. So you're trying to emotionally manipulate me because clearly there is something going on. Meanwhile, the open heart is just like, no, I'm just trying to not upset you because I want to maintain this connection. And I've been taught that I need to suppress myself in order to make you happy. So why can't you just be happy? Why do you keep running away? So, you know, there's these sort of subconscious communications going on. But then what happens is the open heart deep down starts to think that the avoidant is emotionally weak, that they're fragile, and they can't handle my intensity. So I have to suppress it because otherwise they go away. And it's kind of true. And so then what happens is the anxious person actually starts distrusting the avoidant partner as well. And when you start distrusting your partner, you start needing to use power plays to control them because you don't trust them otherwise. Right?
And then they come to me.
Yeah. So then an anxious person will do what's called a punitive withdrawal, which is they will see how good you are without me. And then they won't call them for a long period of time. And then the avoidant partner finally got what they wanted. And they're like, oh, maybe she's figured it out. And then they call again. And then this person thinks, oh, it worked. Right? So then there's like, that's right. Now you want me back, don't you? And they assume it's a power thing. Meanwhile, they're like, oh, I thought you were like, we were finally on the same page.
It's the same thing with my mom. Like, she didn't text me for like 4 days. And I was like, what the fuck? The hell did I do to my mom? and I just started texting her, right? But then once I gave her some attention, like I could tell her she was like holding it in, right? And it's kind of like, man, like if only you would just keep doing that, let me come to you. Let me come to you. Like, stop, like, let me come to you. You know what I'm saying? And they think you're being mean, but it's not that I'm being mean. It's just I can't help it. I can't help it. It's too much attention. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, and like you said, they get offended easily sometimes. You know, and to me, I feel like they're reliving their childhood. You know, I can promise you.
Both ends of the spectrum are, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And even with child mother, when a child is irritated by their parents, when they need space, it's because their parents are too there. You know, if they're thinking about their own emotions. Hey, make me feel good. Make me feel like a good mom. Give me that validation that I never got from my parents, right? And it's sort of like, it just
they transmit to you the not enough. Their parents transmitted to them that you're not enough, and I'm going to give and give and give and give and give to you so that I am essential to your survival, so you don't leave me, and you teach me, and so I'm going to give you all this, so then eventually I will feel like enough. But of course, it's an endless hole. So then and so because you keep trying to show them, yeah, mom, it's great, thanks so much, yeah, I'll do what you want me to, blah blah blah. Don't you approve of this? Well, then they just give you more. Because it's like, oh, it's working. Okay, I'm going to give you more, and you're like, oh. So then you have then we start to also develop a sense of entitlement. Then we start to think they're demonstrating and modeling for you that it's your job to make me happy. So it must be my job to make someone else happy, and that feels like a terrible burden, right? So we end up in this like form of emotional bondage with each other.
Yeah.
And you know, so the message that your parent, there's a wrongness about themselves. They feel a wrongness about themselves, that they are never enough. So they give and give and give and give and give to try to give what they never got, right? But through almost by osmosis now, they have transmitted to you that you are never enough. Because as much as you try to respond to all that they are giving you, it's never enough for them. So now you are never enough too. And now this gets transmitted generation after generation after generation. Right?
Wow. All unintentional. It's like a virus.
Very unconscious. Yeah.
Yeah, it truly is. Truly fascinating, man. It's something that what I learned is that you just need one conscious person. Like me, like I'm like, well, now I'm aware of it. And so I sort of like, I give her, I do that. Like, even though I don't want to, a part of me is like, you know what, Alexis, you're okay. She's not. You give her, just do it, dude. It's not going to kill you, you know? So it's kind of like, you just need to be conscious of it, I suppose, and then that's the first step towards it.
Or like finding the sweet spot where you're more okay with what it is that you're giving, right? Like for example, I was texting with someone online dating thing, and he was someone who really appears to like a lot of text messaging in the beginning to like establish a rapport. And I'm someone who's like, I'll text for like a brief introduction, and I'll be like, all right, let's make a plan, right? And I'm one of those people who I don't necessarily think that digital communication always translates to chemistry, like physical attraction. So I'm okay like establishing a rapport and getting to know each other, but usually I like to plan a date fairly soon so that we can see if there is chemistry there. But this person seemed to like want a lot of texting. And at first I would respond right away because I thought, well, if I respond right away, then he won't need to text me so much. And that wasn't the case. Like the more immediately I responded, the more I thought, oh, I can text her more, right? Mm-hmm. So I realized like I had to kind of establish a boundary around that. And so I sent him a text. I was like, hey, I really appreciate, the reaching out and the checking in. Just so you know, I'm really not that big of a texter, but I would love to save some of this conversation for when we meet. I promise I will be there. I'll text you the morning of to confirm, and I'll see you then. And it was like a couple days from that point. And
there and call and confirm. You let them confirm.
Right. He's coming at me. So I'm like, okay. And then he's like, no, it's all good. I get it. You have priorities. I'm a single mom. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, cool. So then he texts me the next day. Would you like to talk on the phone instead? And I was like, so then my little red flag goes off, and I'm just like, pushy, anxious person. What's going on here? Boundary issue. And then I was like, but maybe he's just nervous that without all the digital communication, I won't show up. Because I've definitely had that experience where people have not shown up to dates. They were like, confirmed 15 minutes before and never showed up, right?
Oh, I hate that. So disrespectful.
And I get that, with online dating, I totally understand there's that element, and I was like, and maybe he thought when I said I wasn't a big texter, he thought I was like, in a white girl way asking for him to call instead. And I say that because there's a joke with me and my sister, like white girls ask for things but indirectly. So I said to him, actually, and I was like, how do I respond to this? Because I felt annoyed. I did feel annoyed. And I was like, how do I respond to this? Clearly he wants reassurance. How do I reassure him without slipping into feeling resentful about it and without feeling like I'm feeding the beast, And so I thought, well, he wants to talk on the phone. Maybe he wants to hear my voice, but I can't commit the half hour to an hour that it would take, that would inevitably become. So I decided to leave him a voice message, basically saying like, hey, thanks for checking in. Unfortunately, I can't, have a phone call between now and then, but if you want to hear my voice, here it is. And I was just like, I swear I will be there. Text you the morning of, see you then. And he left me alone for a blessed 48 hours until we went on the date, at which point I did what I said I was going to do, showed up. And, he wasn't actually a pushy person, a little socially awkward, but not a pushy person. And I think just didn't know how to negotiate the online way of communicating. So it was actually a lovely date. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that there are these little moments that we have when we're trying to connect with the people that our boundaries get stimulated in like these very real ways. And like how to negotiate that by considering it kind of like a co-creative process and negotiate, just following your gut. Like, does this feel good? Does this not feel good? Is there a third solution here that I'm not thinking of right away that, our initial response might be, but maybe that response, like, just let it calm down a little bit. And there may be like a gray space where you can kind of meet each other halfway. Right.
Yeah, sometimes that response is really something you need to relax into, especially if you're someone who's avoidant. Like that, oh my God, it's too much. And I learned to just like, all right, give it a few minutes, give it a few hours and just
I can take it. I can take
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and it's just like anything, like especially with anxious people, if you're willing to be in a relationship, you also have to be willing to not be in one equally. And there's no middle ground around it, or else you'll lose power. You'll end up being hurt. Like the most important thing for anybody is being able to be, for anxious people, being able to not be in a relationship. For avoidance, being able to be in a
Be in
relationship.
one. Yeah.
Because at the same time, it's like they're both, it's weird, right? They're like the other side of the coin, but almost the same anxiety, same emotions, but just coming out in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Truly
And
fascinating.
yeah.
Truly fascinating, Brianna. Well, Brianna, let's end it here. We talked a
Nice.
lot.
You have a nice hour and 15-minute interview.
Yeah, right.
You'll
So
have to
tell me,
break this up.
what are the services that you offer? Where can people contact you? Because I saw you have courses, right?
Yes.
You have different courses, which are very unique. And so tell people how they can contact you. And look, you should start a YouTube channel.
I have one.
Oh, good. I didn't see it. Sorry about that. Woo. I didn't see it. I just saw your website. Good,
Yeah.
good for you. And so tell me, you're gonna send me all the information about it through email and stuff like that. But tell me.
Yes. I'll give you the links, and people can, catch it in the caption of the video. I do have I have a website, and I sell online courses in attachment. There's also a quiz that people can take to figure out what attachment style they think they lean towards. I do have a YouTube channel, and I tend to go live once a week and release 2 videos per week there, and an Instagram. All of it's the same. It's just my name, Brianna McWilliam. And I'll give you the links to check out that information. But I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat with you about these things. I could talk about it for hours on end.
I can tell. But who do you specifically? Who's like the people who should definitely work with you? Like what? Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
All attachment styles. I usually offer courses. Anyone who purchases one of my course, they get into my private Facebook groups, which is where I do like group live streams, so people can ask me questions directly, and we interact in that way. So I have courses for anxious attachment, disorganized attachment, and avoidant attachment. So any one of those 3, if people feel like they fit into them, I have a bundled course, which is all 3 of them, for anyone that is either secure and they want to learn more about their partner, or someone who just comprehensively wants to know about all the attachment styles. And then those are sort of like the beginner level courses. And then after that, I've got 2 sort of higher level courses. One of them is just on healing attachment wounds in general. And that one gets more into what I was talking about, like grief and the neurological research around attachment, like getting more into like the research of the brain and how the body gets affected by attachment, the addictive chemicals involved in what's called the anxious-avoidant trap, which we've been talking about, is the sort of magnetism we see happening between avoidant and anxious partners, but also the sort of explosiveness that occurs between them. And then I have a course called Relationship Rescue, a toolkit for healthy communication in unstable relationships. And that was a course I actually co-developed with a friend of mine. So in that course, the 2 of us will demonstrate like conversations you can have with a partner, and also we bring in the art. So it's creative arts intervention. So sometimes people get scared at the word art, but it's really just exercises and experientials that you can do on a nonverbal level with your partner to help you connect beyond these sometimes like really heavy conversations that we're being asked to have. Like, can we start from a playful, fun, creative place where we're actually able to play with each other and then address the heavy stuff, right?
Hey, I think that's a healthy way of doing things, unlike with me. My shit can be a little fucked up sometimes, but I'm in it for the results. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the time that you gave me, and I really believe that people are going to benefit from it, just like I benefited from it.
Good.
And not everyone knows everything in the world, right?
Yeah. Well, I like to think of it, people sort of put themselves up as experts, but I prefer the explorer archetype, which is, I think when you claim you're an expert on something, then you cut yourself off, and like, you have to like, you can't make mistakes, right? But I think when you are an explorer, you're just inviting people to make the mistakes alongside with you, and that just feels like a more human process.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I hate to go off the thing, is because like, you really think about it. Every individual, each experience would trigger something, would trigger through osmosis or through like serendipity, another subject that you're fascinated by. So if you just think yourself as a attachment expert, as you're studying attachment, something might arise, a curiosity that will combine with your attachment and understanding that will lead to something new, something unique to your own individuality, right? So it's kind of like when you think that you're an expert in this, just like I'm not a dating expert. I just know what I know. In other words, it gives me more of a openness to know other forms of knowledge. And that's what humans are. You will never develop in a linear fashion. It will always be diversions from what you intended. If you really follow your heart, you'll notice it'll never go how you expect it. But if things go as you expected, that means you're following a dogma, and maybe there was a moment of creativity that you didn't follow simply because you're so tied into a certain road.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they call that the auxiliary ego. That's there's a term for that. It's called auxiliary ego.
What's that?
It means that you sort of, or some people call it like spiritual priming, but it's basically when you hand over your decision-making capacity and your meaning-making capacity to a construct outside of yourself, like religion or dogma, some kind of dogma.
You know how they say, like, write down your goals. You don't need to find out how you're going to do it. Just write them down. You'll find out how. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's truly fascinating, man. And I hope everyone go to her channel, especially if you need to understand this, because, you know, there's better people out there that talks about this. And do you also talk about grief on your channel?
There are actually a few videos where we talk about complicated grief.
All right, good. Because I do notice a sense of grieving my youth.
Yes. That's what attachment wounds are, in a nutshell.
Wow, so it's like, man, it's like you gotta stop being attached to phases in life. Or
integrate them, just be in conversation with them.
Oh man, that's just so crazy, man. All right, Brianna, thank you so much, and
hope
we find what is it? We meet our paths again and stuff like that.
Yes, and our paths will cross again.
Yeah, and hopefully people come to you. Go to her, okay? Or else I'll close the channel.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.